Welcome friends to the lecture series of the course Marketing Research and Analysis. Today we are discussing about the research design process. So, let us see what is the research design process and what are the types of research designs involved in any study. So, in the last end of the last lecture we were discussing about the different types of research designs, for example, the exploratory research design, and then you have which is also called as a non-conclusive research design. The exploratory is also called as the non-conclusive research design, followed by conclusive research design, which is of two types, the causal research and the descriptive research. The descriptive research is done through a cross sectional way or a longitudinal approach, right. So, let us go one by one and explain. Exploratory, as the name suggests, as you can understand, is something to explore, right. So, you are trying, the researcher is trying to identify something new or bring in some new insights and understand something new. So, there is a less understanding of the research project in hand, right, obviously. So, because there is a less understanding, so the researcher is trying to develop a few questions and try to get an answer to those questions. It helps in discovering new ideas and insights. For example, Newton's the famous apple case, right. So, as the apple fell, Newton thought that something is forcing the apple to fall down, and that is the reason it is not going up and it is only falling down. So, from there he developed the gravitational theory, right. Helps in formulation of hypothesis. Now, why I am saying is helps in formulation of hypothesis is that generally what happens in an exploratory study, the researcher is asking questions because he is not aware what will happen if this new product comes to the market, what will happen if something the pricing, for example, I talked about the pay what you want pricing in the market. Suppose the entire marketing, the pricing mechanism will be on a basis that there is no price at all and people will decide the price, only there is a base price maybe, and then you can pay whatever you like. You will be only informed that there is a base price of, let us say, X, but you may pay 0 or you may pay anything. Suppose we come up with such kind of a mechanism, will it really work? So, we do not know. So, we can explore such ideas. So, once you have done some study, then it helps you to accumulate more knowledge on the subject, and thus further in the future it helps you in the development or the formulation of hypothesis. Techniques like projective techniques, for example, case studies, focus group studies, in-depth interviews are a part of the exploratory research, because when for example, projective techniques, you are shown a kind of a scenario and you are asked to say what do you feel or what do you like. By doing that, what happens is the person, the company or the researcher can understand how do consumers, how do respondents think, right, what is important to them and what is less important to them, what factors maybe affect them mentally. So, such kind of things are very important and they generally do not come out through a simple maybe survey mechanism. Similarly, focus group studies are very important because people talk and they discuss about certain topics, and there many important things are unearthed which are generally not known to the researchers, right. So, this is some important techniques of exploratory. Okay. Then you are followed with the descriptive research. Descriptive research is, as the name says, to describe something. What is that description? Usually market characteristics or functions. So, you may describe the consumer, you may describe the market, you may describe the behavior, anything. It is marked by a clear statement of the problem, specific hypothesis and detailed information needs, very clear. So, that means what? Just imagine, you can only describe something when you have certain knowledge about the subject. If you have no knowledge, then you cannot, one can never ask develop hypothesis, right. So, one can only ask questions in that point, but when you have certain knowledge about the market, for example, or something, to describe it better, you should have some kind of a clear statement and you can develop some hypothesis, but only thing is what you are doing in this descriptive research is you are testing those hypotheses, right, in the market, generally used for describing characteristics of consumers, organizations, market areas, etc. Determine the perception of product characteristics, some usage, right, associated marketing variables, what marketing variables are associated, develop profile of consumers, for example, are they heavy users, light users, frequent users, volume buyers, discount buyers, what kind of how would you develop a profile of the consumer, right. Pricing studies, various pricing studies, at what price level do people leave the break their loyalty, for example. Distribution studies. So, what kind of distributions are helpful? How should you be distributing the product? Is it only through chain of intermediaries, or maybe it is direct? What kind of thing you would do? The 6 W's that is answered in the descriptive research are who, what, when, where, why, and the way to do that research, right. So, these 6 things are very important. Okay. The third, and this is also a part of the conclusive, the last one was also descriptive, was also a part of the conclusive research, and this one causal. As you can understand, causality is inferred when the occurrence of X increases the probability of the occurrence of Y, or whatever, increases or decreases the relationship, but there is a relationship, that means. So, there is a cause and effect relationship. So, there is a cause and effect. So, for example, generally in a linear equation y and x. So, y and x are connected. If y increases, x may increase, if x increases, y may increase, or if x decreases, y may increase, or if x decreases, y may decrease. So, whatever, there is a relationship, cause and effect relationship. Causal relationships are often determined by the use of experiments. So, what you are doing, how is it different? Now, you are experimenting. The experiment may not be in only a lab, it is a social science experiment also possible, right. So, how do people behave in a certain situation, in a certain many interesting experiments have been done to test how people would react during a particular condition, right. So, we can never prove causality, the statement says we can never prove causality, but we can infer a cause and effect relationship, right. There is a relationship between you must have heard the term correlation and causation. For example, correlation are when two things are correlated. For example, let us say the GDP of the country and let us say spending of the people, for example, may be correlated, but they are not cause and effect, might not be cause and effect, right. Similarly, experiments you are doing on the laboratory through some machine or something, or field experiments, right. All social science experiments mostly are field experiments basically, right. So, this is causal research. So, here also you are testing the maybe hypothesis. Okay. Then we come to something in the research process, after the research design is important, then we come to something like in the research design, for example, what is the measurement and scaling, something very important, again connected in the process. So, when a researcher is doing a research, what kind of a measurement system is he using? So, that we say what kind of scaling technique is he using. So, the scale maybe has 4 characteristics, scale characteristics: description, which says unique labels or descriptors, for example, male, female, right, heavy user, less less user, kind of things. It has a order. Now, it can be greater than, it can be less than, it can be equal to, right. Distance, what is the distance, the difference between 2 points, right, for example, in an interval ratio scale. So, what is the difference? Origin, does it have a fixed beginning or not? So, these are some of the characteristics of a scale that is frequently decided and thought of, taken into account, right. Look at this, there are some primary scales of measurement. So, these primary scales are basically nominal. So, where the researcher is only assigning a number, this number do not mean anything. So, for example, let us say this person is, let us say, first, second, third, but his number is 7th, that means he has a jersey number maybe 7th, your roll number in the class, for example, right. So, numbers assigned to runners, for example. Ordinal, the second higher level, you can understand that the scales are graduating, as they go up they are graduating. Rank orders, so this is, for example, the third place, second place, first place, right. So, you can think the same thing here also. So, first place, this person is first. So, this person whatever he is second and this is third. So, here we are saying we are placing them in a particular order. So, sometime the nominal is just to represent. Now, for example, a Messi, for example, footballer, he has a jersey number. Now, that jersey number does not mean that he is that kind of a player, right, but it only represents that if he is wearing that jersey number, it is Messi, right. Similarly, or but ordinal says ki if there is a difference then there is an order, right. He is first in the class, he is second in the class, he is third in the class. But what ordinal does not say is that whether the difference between first and second, second and third is equal or not equal. Interval ratio comes, interval scale comes the third scale, right. Here the performance, this scale and this scale, these two are very similar, except that one point is that the ratio scale is a scale where you have a 0 point, that means there is an absolutely fixed point, a starting absolute point, right. So that is why we say for example the interval scale, for example the best example we can think of is that any interval any psychological measurement, for example in a scale of 1 to 5 how much do you place the person, right, where do you place the system, right, how good is it, how efficient is it, right, for example. But ratio scale is a scale where it tells you, for example the kilogram, the the meter distance, for example it starts from, suppose somebody says I am 80 kg, then it is from 0 that I am 80 kg, right. So this is what is the beauty of a ratio scale, right. But interval scale you cannot have a absolute, you might not have a absolute 0 point, right. So the difference, for example you can understand from the the centigrade scale, centigrade versus the Fahrenheit, right. Now when you look at it, so they one degree at one point makes them another although two different degrees they are similar, but the values are actually different, right. So centigrade and Fahrenheit, their different values make the same meaning, right. So that is why interval scale does not have a absolute 0 point, ratio scale has a absolute 0 point, as I said, weight and all, right. A classification, how do you define the classification techniques or the scaling techniques? So basically two techniques, comparative and non-comparative. So comparative means you are comparing, right. So paired comparison, maybe I am comparing between A and B. Now which is better? Let us say I am comparing between, let us say any two products, let us say a Honda car versus a, let us say a Ford car, right. Now which is better, for example any particular model I can take or something. So when you do a paired comparison, it is a part of the comparative scale. Similarly rank order, now rank order means which is first, which is second, which is third, the respondent is asked to rank the products in a particular format. Third is the constant sum scale, where a sum of let us say 100 is given, and let us say people are asked to divide the sum of 100 into several products. Now products could be, for example what kind of let us say you are purchasing, let us say groceries, for example. Now this groceries, how would you like to spend, how much would you like to spend where, right, or a particular, let us say I give you 100 points and I say there are several toothpaste, for example, and which one would you how would you put your money into that. So this 100 by allocating a certain amount of resource into the particular brand, you can one can infer that okay, this is the value that is placed on the particular brand X. So let us say for example X, Y, Z, let us say, and somebody places 40, 35, let us say 25. Now that means one can understand that X is 40, Y is 35, Z is 25. So this constant sum 100 has been broken into X, Y, Z. So this is how you understand. Similarly Q sort is a technique where what happens is it is a piling technique, where the respondent is asked to select the variables and they are tried to sort it out in a different heap. For example as you can understand ki let us say I will ask you to form groups, for example. So how do I form groups? Now anything similar will be placed in one group. So Q sort technique is a scaling technique where the respondent is asked to select a particular product and then group it up in certain ways, so that the products in one particular group are more similar to the other groups, right. So this is a Q sort technique. Then you have non-comparative scales. Non-comparative scales are for example the continuous rating scales, which is like suppose let us take this line. Now this line I would ask you ki how much do you like this particular class. Now suppose somebody says this is let us say 0 and this is let us say 100, let us say. So somebody places here, right. So I can understand, well this is to the positive side, much to the positive side, right. So, by understanding this, continuous scale are very useful, because sometimes people who do not understand the numbers well, for them it is easy. For example, a person in the rural area or a child can be given a small scale and ask, how much do you like this? Now, he might give you a scale, a distance, but that might not be exactly a point, but that tells what exactly he feels or the person feels. Similarly, you have itemized rating scales. Itemized rating scales are scales which where every variable is given a description, right, is given a description. For example, let us say, let us take the first case of Likert scale. So, I am saying 1 to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, 1 is, let us say, very low, right, 2 is low, average, high, very high, right. So, when I am describing each character, so itemized rating scales says that you should be able to describe. Now, why it is important is that you need to understand that if we do not describe ourselves, what happens when the researcher puts in the respondent a question and he himself is not in a position to, let us say, describe the value, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, then how do you expect the respondent to understand it? For example, suppose I ask you to give a name, a description to every value. For example, there is 1 to 5 now, suppose I make it 9. So, what would I say to now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So, it becomes very cumbersome and very difficult. So, when we are feeling the difficulty, how do we expect the researcher to respondent to understand it? So, itemized rating scales are very important, because in this way it makes the life easier and data collection more simpler. Semantic differential is a similar technique, where it is a bipolar technique, where for example, two cases, lazy versus active, it is taken. So, two bipolar words are taken and there are 7 gaps, right, and the person is asked to rate, suppose a particular person or somebody, how would you place this person in this scale. Now, if he places here, then it is something like he gets a 3 in the towards the lazy, right. So, this is how you understand the semantic differential. Staple scale is also a similar scale, where what happens is there is a middle point, for example, the service of a company. Now, what I am doing is, so service is here, so what I will do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then minus 1, minus 2, minus 3, minus 4, minus 5. So, what I am doing is, if I ask you how do you explain the service of, let us say, Tata cars or Tata motors, for example, right. So, when I am asking service is the middle point and there are 5 points up, 5 points down. So, this is a nothing but a staple scale. Okay. Now, once you are done with scale, then you come to sample. The researcher also needs to understand what kind of sample is he using, who are the samples, and how do you understand them. A sample is a smaller collection of units which represents the population basically, right. So, why sample? Now, because resources are less, time and money are less with us, we have a definite time period, we do not have infinite resources, and given results with known accuracy that can be calculated mathematically. If I can know the results with a smaller value, then what is the point of taking the universe, right, because that has its own limitations. There is a sampling frame. What is the sampling frame? It is a list from which the potential respondents are drawn. For example, let us see this: class rosters, registrar's office, right. Now, what is, for example, take a yellow page or a telephone directory, yellow page or a telephone directory, right. So, I can consider this as a sampling frame. From here I can collect my sample, right. A researcher should always be very careful in taking the sample frame, and because there can be some errors associated with it, and you should be able to assess what kind of sampling errors can the sampling frame have, what errors the sampling frame can have. So, when you are doing the sampling, you need to be very clear with these things. Okay. Errors in research are very important, because if you conduct a research and you have done an error somewhere, that effect of the error goes on till it is like simple mathematics. If you have done a mistake at one point or one step, then that effect will go on, carryover effect will go on till the end, and your results will be entirely different. Okay. Now, coming to the sampling techniques, right. So, non-probability sampling techniques and probability sampling techniques, two major areas, right. So, in non-probability we have convenience, convenience means something very convenient, easy. Okay. So, I need to collect data, I am going to my friends in the class and I am collecting data from them, right. So, they are my respondent, but that does not make it a rational way of choosing your respondent, but that is easy for me, right. Judgment. Now, here I am not using convenience only, but I am saying judgment. So, I am using my judgment, although it is convenient maybe, but still I am using some judgment ki who should I be selecting in this class of mine. For example, if I am doing a study on, let us say health, or let us say health indicators, is a student of physics much better, or a student of biology much better to be a part of the process, right. So, I am using my judgment basically. Quota. Quota is basically another method where what happens is the researcher develops the control categories. Now, what are the control categories? For example, maybe the gender, the location, right. So, what I am doing is how do I on what basis do I collect my respondent, right. So, quota helps in the first step. There are 2 step process, it is basically you can understand the 2 step process. So, like a judgmental is a 2 stage, it is also called as a 2 stage judgmental process, right. In the first stage you develop the control categories, ki what are the control categories on which I will collect the data from. Second is ki how much from each will I collect the data. So, the only thing is why it is coming under the non probability sampling technique is here you are using the judgment in selecting the number of respondent, right. So, both ways you have used your judgment. So, that is why it is a non probability sampling. The fourth one is snowball, where it is a very simple but efficient technique in the sense that here the respondent selects, the researcher selects one respondent and then he asks that respondent to select another respondent for him. So, by doing this what happens, it is like a referral sampling. So, you refer somebody and the person whom you have referred, he then refers somebody. So, by doing that the company or the researcher at least knows that the respondents who are being chosen, they are following a certain characteristics or a pattern. Okay. The other is the probability sampling technique, which again has several. For example, simple random. So, simple. So, what does randomness says? Everybody has a chance to get selected. So, simple random means I may pull out anybody from the class of, I need 5 people in a class of 60, I can pull up any 5, right. So, this is a simple random. Systematic sampling is slightly different from simple random. In this you can see what happens is, let us say this is some houses, for example, house number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. I need 3 houses for my study. Now, I can randomly choose any one point from here. Let us say I have randomly chosen the 3rd house, right. So, if I need 3 houses, so what should I do? Who is my next? Now, the 3rd element from the beginning. Now, when I am doing this, there is a probability, because I could have chosen the first one also, I could have chosen the second one, I could have chosen the third, and yes, I have chosen the third one in my case. But had I chosen the first one, suppose, then I would have chosen the systematically. If I go first, then the 4th one, and then 7th one, right. So, this is why it is called a systematic sampling. Next is stratified. Stratified and quota look very similar actually, but they are different. The reason is, what is the stratified sampling? Let me explain. You divide the sample population into different stratas. Now, each strata has a different characteristics, right. Now, these strata that you break up has different characteristics. Now, in stratified sampling what it is said is, first of all, every strata you have to take sample from each strata and you cannot leave any strata, right. So, the chances of selection of each strata is high. Okay. So, what happens here? How is it different? You see, now, but the selection is again random. Now, suppose I have broken it up into several stratas. Now, from each strata how many samples and who are the samples that I am choosing is again a random process. So, stratified sampling is also a two-way sampling process. First divide the stratas and then pull out the data from the strata. But But quota, in quota it was different from quota, because the quota was having a non probability, the judgment was being used to select the respondent. Here it is not judgment, but it is a randomness that is there, ki in this strata I am selecting 3 people maybe. So, out of 10 any 3, let us say, here any 3, here any 3, but condition applied is every strata is involved, I am not missing a single strata. So, we cannot say that I am missing any strata, right. Then is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is similar to a little similar to stratified, in the sense that what happens here is that I break the population into several clusters. Okay. Now, out of which I may select only one or maybe 1 or 2 clusters and not all. So, stratified was saying that every cluster, every strata was a part of the study, but here in cluster I am choosing only maybe these 2 and not this rest. So, it is done, but on how do I choose? On random basis. So, there was no nothing into that. So, I chose it randomly, but I chose only 1 or 2. So, I am not selecting the entire thing. So, that is how the cluster sampling is different from the stratified sampling, but it is easy because sometimes you have limited resources, suppose, and you want to see that you get a result fast. So, in that sense you can take a complete one cluster completely, or maybe 2 clusters partially you can take, right. So, these are some of the sampling techniques, right. Then once you are done with the sampling techniques, then comes your field work or data collection. Okay. Just I will brief this much and then I will stop it here. So, field work or data collection, once you have done, you know who is your sample, and you know how to collect the data, the scale you are aware of it, then the final job is the field work or data collection. So, how do I collect the data, what measures do I follow? So, basically if you see, data collection is of, we can divide into qualitative versus quantitative study. So, if I am doing a in depth interview is a qualitative study, a focus group study is a qualitative study. But suppose I am doing a primary data, for example, collecting the number of respondents through a survey form is a quantitative study, right. Or I may divide my study into data collection process into primary or secondary. Primary means something on the field. So, on the field I am visiting the field and I am trying to collect the data. Secondary is something already available. So, in some maybe in some journals or magazines, etc., right. So, already this data is available maybe with the census office or some office, right, and you are collecting the data. So, this is how you do the data collection process, right. So, in the next session we will go into little deeper into the what things do you need to consider or keep in mind while getting into the data collection, and how data collection then becomes very important, because if you do a process if you have a large element of errors, sampling or non-sampling errors in your study, then your job might become faulty and you might do some errors might creep in a study and your results might not come as it should have been, right. So, you need to be careful how you are doing it. Once you understand them, and in the next lecture I will talk about this data collection process, right, in detail. Okay. Thank you for the day, wish you all the luck.